So let's talk about a bill in Connecticut called SB151. Now, on the surface, it seems to be all about housing. But once you start to peel back the layers, you find a story that's really about power, about history, and this big debate over who gets to decide what a town looks like. Is this a much-needed solution to the housing crisis, or is it a state takeover of local control? Okay, let's get into it. All right, I want you to look at this number, 5,000 square feet. That's about 1/9 of an acre. Just try to picture a house on a lot that size. Now, really lock that number into your brain because it's the key that unlocks this entire debate. So, what is this bill really? At first glance, you'd think SB 151 is a pretty straightforward piece of housing reform.
I mean, the whole idea behind it is to tackle a problem we're all familiar with, right? Housing costs are just incredibly high, and there never seems to be enough of it to go around. So the bill is being presented as a direct answer to that very real problem.
And if you listen to the arguments for it, you can totally see why it's getting support. So let's take a look at the case for SB 151.
And what's interesting here is just how reasonable all of these goals sound. Proponents are looking at a statewide housing crisis, and they believe it just can't be fixed one town at a time. They argue that for years and years, restrictive local zoning has made it way too hard and way too expensive to build new homes, especially affordable ones. So from their point of view, cutting through all that red tape and creating some standard rules isn't just about making things more efficient, it's about overriding local barriers that they see as part of the problem. The goal, they say, is to finally make sure that houses can actually get built, helping out younger families and seniors who need a place to live.
But this is where the whole story takes a really sharp turn. Because the way the bill goes about achieving these goals, well, that's where all the controversy is. And this brings us to the catch, something the source material calls the sovereign sewer. And that's the question that changes everything. If the goals sound so good, where does it all go wrong? Well, according to critics, the problem isn't with the aims of the bill, it's with the mandates. It doesn't just encourage towns to plan better, it actually forbids them from enforcing their own rules. And believe it or not, it all comes down to this one kind of harmless sounding phrase, planned to be connected to public sewer. This isn't just some boring technical detail, it's a trigger. In fact, it's the single most powerful and controversial part of this entire bill.
It's a trigger for a legal concept called preemption. It's a fancy word, but what it means is actually pretty simple. It's when a state law just steps in and completely cancels out a local one. The state law wins, and the local rule basically gets erased. So here's how this actually works, and it's pretty wild. Let's say a town has some old conceptual sewer plan from back in the 1970s. One that was never actually built because it was too expensive or maybe environmentally risky. Well, under SB 151, that old unfunded plan can be dusted off and used today to trigger the law. And the second it's triggered, poof, local zoning is just gone. The state's rules, including that 5,000 square foot minimum lot size we talked about, suddenly take over.
As you can imagine, this automatic trigger creates this whole cascade of what critics are calling hidden costs and loopholes, and they have some very real-world consequences for these towns. This slide just illustrates the disconnect perfectly. The bill kind of takes this one-size-fits-all approach, assuming all land is pretty much the same. But in reality, towns often have larger lot sizes for really critical environmental reasons, to protect their drinking water, to manage fragile wetlands, or to prevent flooding. Every town's landscape is unique, but the bill treats a hilly watershed town the exact same way it treats a flat urban one. And here's the real kicker. The state mandates all this new density, but it provides absolutely zero new funding for the roads, schools, or sewer upgrades that are needed to support it. There are no new environmental reviews required either. So basically, the state takes all the power, but the town is left with all of the responsibility and has to figure out how to deal with the consequences. There's also this really subtle but powerful loophole that has to do with historic properties. Now, the bill says it protects them, but that protection is incredibly narrow. A property is only safe if it's already on the National or State Historic Register by July 1st, 2026. After that hard deadline, any locally designated historic districts or properties that are still being studied for preservation, they get no protection at all. So when you start to put all these pieces together, the sewer trigger, the environmental issues, that historic property loophole, the debate stops being just about housing. It becomes about something much, much bigger, a fundamental question of power.
And this gets right to the heart of a really old Connecticut tradition known as home rule. It's this core belief that local decisions, especially about how land gets used, should be made locally, not dictated from the state capital.
So the main argument you hear from opponents is that SB 151 is a direct attack on this principle. They say it uses this obscure little mechanism, these dusty old sewer plans, to completely strip away local consent and centralize all that zoning power at the state level. It just fundamentally changes the relationship between the state and its towns. Which brings us to the final lingering question that's really at the center of this whole thing. It isn't about whether you're for or against new housing. It's more of a constitutional question. If towns lose the authority to plan their own futures but are still stuck with all the responsibility for the outcomes, what exactly is left of home rule?